Two videos, same continent, same afternoon. In one, a wall of orange smoke rolls over a ridgeline in Spain's Guadalajara province, and firefighters are running a line they've now held for 6 straight days against a fire that's already bigger than anything this country has ever officially recorded. In the other, 30 seconds of hailstones the size of coins are hammering down on a resort town on Croatia's Adriatic coast, denting cars, shredding umbrellas, sending tourists sprinting for cover under a sky that was 98 degrees 2 days earlier. Same continent, same week. Two completely different disasters. I need you to actually understand what you just watched, because this is not two unrelated news stories that happen to land on the same day. This is one weather pattern breaking in half. Europe's third heat wave of the year has not ended. It is split, with one half of the continent locked in worsening heat, drought, and wildfire, and the other half getting hammered by sudden, violent storms and hail as the same system destabilizes on its eastern edge. And when I say millions of people, I mean it literally. Spain has now declared a state of emergency. France is asking the European Union for help. And Western Balkan countries are watching a heat crisis flip into a severe storm crisis within 48 hours. So today, we're breaking down exactly how a single heat dome splits into two different weather emergencies, what's actually happening on the ground in Spain, France, Italy, and the Balkans right now, why this is the third time this has happened in Europe this year, and what it means if you live there, have family there, or are planning to travel there in the coming weeks. Let's get into it. Before we get into what's splitting, I need you to understand what's been building all year, because context here is everything. This is not Europe's first heat wave of 2026. It's the third. The first one arrived in late May, a genuinely historic, record-shattering event that pushed temperatures 10 to 15 degrees Celsius above normal in parts of Western Europe and broke all-time records for the hottest May and spring temperatures ever measured in several countries. The second wave hit in late June, peaking between June 20th and 23rd, when Spain and Portugal pushed toward 44 degrees Celsius. France put 49 of its 96 mainland departments under the highest heat alert, and the United Kingdom broke its all-time June temperature record. That second wave alone was blamed for a mounting death toll as officials finished counting the aftermath. Now we're in the third wave, and it has been described by meteorologists as part of a pattern of stifling, virtually back-to-back heat waves hitting Europe with barely a breather in between. Europe has already burned more land to wildfire this year than the annual average of the last 2 decades, and we're still only in late July. Here's why that repetition matters technically, not just narratively. Each of these heat waves has been driven by the same basic mechanism, a stubborn, nearly stationary area of high pressure that meteorologists often call a heat dome, and, in its more extreme form, an omega block, named because the shape it carves into the upper-level wind pattern looks like the Greek letter omega. An omega block does 3 things at once. It traps hot air underneath it like a lid. It physically shoves rain-bearing weather systems around itself rather than letting them pass through. And because it barely moves, it lets the same patch of ground bake under direct sun day after day, which is exactly how you get repeat records instead of a single spike. Europe is warming at roughly twice the global average rate, according to the Copernicus Climate Change Service and the World Meteorological Organization. That's not a side note. It's the reason these blocks are forming more often, sitting for longer, and recovering into new heat waves faster than they used to. The World Health Organization put out a blunt warning back in early July that more deadly weeks could still lie ahead for the continent. As of this week, that warning is looking accurate. So here's the actual meteorology behind what's happening right now, because the heat wave split in two is not just a catchy way to describe two unrelated stories. It's a real physically specific process. When an omega block like the one that's dominated Europe's summer starts to weaken or shift, it doesn't collapse evenly. The ridge of high pressure, the hot lid, tends to hold firmest over one region while breaking down at its edges elsewhere. In this case, the ridge has held stubbornly over the southwest, Spain, Portugal, southern France, and Italy. Underneath that ridge, air continues to sink and compress, which is exactly what keeps temperatures climbing and keeps the ground drying out, which in turn is exactly the recipe for extreme wildfire risk. But on the eastern flank of that same block, over the Western Balkans and parts of Central Europe, the pattern is doing something very different. As the ridge's edge destabilizes, it allows cooler, more unstable air to work in underneath the lingering heat and humidity already baked into the ground and lower atmosphere. When you get a sharp temperature and moisture contrast like that, colliding air masses, you get exactly the kind of explosive vertical development that produces severe thunderstorms, large hail, and torrential, short-duration downpours. That's not the atmosphere cooling down peacefully. That's the atmosphere violently unloading the energy it's been storing up for weeks, right at the seam where the heat dome is breaking down. That's why authorities across the Western Balkans have explicitly described this as a shift from heat wave conditions to hailstorm conditions, not a simple return to normal, pleasant summer weather. Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Slovenia, southern Serbia, and North Macedonia have all seen this transition happen within a matter of days, and in some cases, hours. Meanwhile, the Southwest hasn't gotten any relief at all. If anything, conditions there have gotten more dangerous as the ridge holds and drought conditions deepen. This is the split, one weather system. Two completely different expressions of the same underlying instability, playing out simultaneously across a few thousand miles of the same continent. Let's start with where the heat side of this split is doing the most damage right now: Spain. The country's central Guadalajara province has been fighting what's being called the Wildfire for 6 consecutive days as of this week, a blaze that had already spread beyond 26,000 hectares, and according to some regional reporting, was threatening to grow into the largest wildfire in Spain's recorded history, with estimates pushing past 32,000 hectares. That's not a controlled burn or a contained brush fire. That's an area larger than many mid-sized cities, and emergency crews have been working around. The clock, as temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius, keep pushing fire danger into the extreme category. This isn't Spain's first deadly fire of the season either. Less than 2 weeks before this current emergency, Spain suffered its deadliest wildfire in decades near the town of Badar in the southern Almeria province, which killed 13 people. Think about that timeline for a second. A wildfire disaster that killed more than a dozen people, followed within 2 weeks by a second fire on pace to become the largest ever recorded in the country. That's not two unlucky, unrelated events. That's a pattern of increasing frequency and severity directly tied to the same underlying heat and drought conditions holding over the region. As of July 24th, the Spanish government has taken the significant step of declaring a state of emergency in response to the ongoing wildfire crisis. That's a formal acknowledgement from the national government that local and regional firefighting resources are being stretched to their limits, and it typically opens the door to additional national resources, military support, and coordination that wouldn't be available under normal emergency response. Officials in Spain have also been candid about something that matters for how you think about this crisis. The vast majority of wildfires don't start on their own. Roughly 9 out of 10 wildfires begin as a result of human activity, whether that's accidental, a discarded cigarette, sparks from machinery, an unattended campfire, or, in some documented cases, deliberate. Authorities have specifically urged people to avoid activities like barbecuing in areas already under heatwave and fire risk warnings, because under these drought conditions, it doesn't take much of a spark to ignite fuel that's had weeks to dry out completely. France's side of this heat and fire half of the split has been just as serious, and it's come with a genuinely tragic human cost. On Tuesday, 2 French firefighters were killed when their truck was engulfed in flames while battling a wildfire in the Gironde region in southwestern France, near Bordeaux's airport, an area that had already been placed on high alert for fire danger. That death came just 2 weeks after another firefighter died, battling a separate blaze in the Savoy region in the French Alps. Reporting from later in the week described wildfires across France, Spain, and Italy collectively killing 3 firefighters, underscoring just how dangerous this firefighting effort has become across multiple countries simultaneously, not just in one hotspot. The scale of the fire damage in France this year has reportedly already broken previous wildfire destruction records for the country by the midpoint of July, which tells you this isn't a single bad week. It's an accumulating seasonal disaster. And as of July 24th, France has taken the step of formally seeking help from the European Union to manage the ongoing wildfire response, a request that typically triggers coordinated aid such as additional water-bombing aircraft, firefighting personnel, and equipment shared across EU member states through the bloc's civil protection mechanism. Italy, too, has been swept into the same fire emergency, with wildfires reported burning across the country alongside Spain and France as part of the same underlying heat and drought conditions gripping southern Europe. Now, let's go to the other half of the split, because what's happening in the Western Balkans looks almost nothing like Spain and France, even though it's coming from the exact same broader weather pattern. In Croatia's northern Adriatic resort town of Rovinj, a hailstorm injured several people, with local media capturing scenes of hailstones battering the coastline hard enough to hurt bystanders and damage property. That's a real shift from the extreme heat that had been sitting over that same region just days earlier. Kosovo's Hydrometeorological Institute issued warnings ahead of expected storms, cautioning specifically about lightning strikes, damage to the electricity, network, power outages, flooding, and property damage. Essentially, the full severe weather checklist, arriving in a region that had been under heat warnings not long before. Local video from the broader region has shown roofs torn off buildings, torrential rain flooding streets, and residents scrambling to cover parked cars with blankets and whatever they could find to protect them from hail damage. According to regional forecasters, this storm activity is expected to keep spreading rather than staying contained to one country, moving north into Slovenia, cutting across Bosnia and Herzegovina, continuing through southern Serbia, and reaching North Macedonia, where injuries from hail have also been reported. That's 5 countries experiencing this same destabilization within a matter of days, which tells you the eastern edge of this heat dome isn't breaking down quietly. It's breaking down violently, country by country, as the pattern shifts through the region. Let's talk about scale, because millions isn't an exaggeration here. It's close to a literal headcount if you add up the populations actually living inside the affected zones on both sides of this split. On the heat and fire side, you're talking about tens of millions of people living across central Spain, southwestern France, and Italy currently under heat warnings, drought restrictions, and in some areas, evacuation orders or advisories tied to active wildfire fronts. More than 2,200 residents were evacuated from communities near the Guadalajara fire alone. Add in the populations of Madrid, Barcelona, Rome, and the dozens of smaller towns and rural communities directly in or near fire zones, and you're looking at a genuinely enormous number of people whose daily life, water use, outdoor work, travel plans, air quality is being directly shaped by this event right now. On the storm and hail side, you've got millions more across Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, North Macedonia, and Kosovo dealing with sudden infrastructure strain, damaged power networks, flooded streets, storm-damaged roofs and vehicles, arriving with far less warning time than a slow-building heat wave typically gives people to prepare. And here's the part that ties both halves together. Both sides of the split are straining the exact same kinds of systems, just through opposite mechanisms. Heat strains power grids through surging air conditioning demand and drought-strained hydropower. Hailstorms strain power grids by physically damaging lines and substations. Heat strains emergency services through wildfire response and heat illness calls. Storms strain emergency services through flood rescue and storm damage response. It's the same civil infrastructure, hit from 2 different directions, in the same week, on the same continent. Here's what I'll be watching over the coming days, and what you should watch too if you're anywhere near either half of this split. On the fire side, the key question is whether the ridge holding over Spain, France, and Italy weakens on any meaningful timeline, or whether it reinforces and extends this drought and fire emergency further into August. Given that this is already the 3rd heat wave of the summer, and given that long-range outlooks are pointing toward high pressure building again over Central and Eastern Europe in the weeks ahead, I would not bet on a quick, clean resolution here. Watch specifically for whether Spain's state of emergency gets extended or expanded to additional provinces, and whether the EU's response to France's request brings in enough additional waterbombing aircraft and personnel to actually shift the trajectory of these fires rather than just holding the line. On the storm side, watch whether this severe weather keeps marching east and north as forecasters expect, and whether the intensity holds or fades as it moves further from the original heat dome's edge. Hail events like this tend to be short-lived at any single location, but can recur across a region for days as the same unstable pattern keeps regenerating new storm cells. And zoom out to the full season picture. This is heat wave number 3, and forecasters are already flagging a real chance of further record heat in the UK, Ireland, and Western Europe as we move into August. If that holds, we may be looking at a 4th distinct heat event before this summer is over, which would make 2026 one of the more relentless heat years Europe has recorded, layered directly on top of the increasing wildfire destruction we've already seen. I also want to put this year in context against Europe's recent heat wave history because the death tolls from these events tend to get undercounted in the moment and only firmed up months later. The 2022 European heat waves are now estimated to have killed somewhere between 20,000 confirmed and in as many as 70,000 when researchers account for excess mortality, with roughly 40 billion euros in damages. The summer of 2024 saw over 62,700 heat-related deaths across the continent once a Nature Medicine analysis finished crunching the excess mortality data. Both of those totals came from research published well after the actual heat had passed, because heat deaths, unlike storm or fire deaths, often show up in hospital and mortality statistics weeks or months later, once researchers can compare actual death rates against the seasonal baseline. That's part of why I'm cautious about giving you a confident death toll for this specific event today. The numbers you're seeing right now out of Spain and France are the immediate confirmed fatalities, firefighters killed in the line of duty, wildfire victims recovered from burned structures. The full public health toll of this 3rd heat wave, especially among older adults and people with existing health conditions, typically isn't known until well after the heat itself is over. If you live in, have family in, or are traveling to any part of this split in the coming weeks, here's what actually matters. If you're anywhere in the heat and fire zone, Spain, southern France, Italy, take fire risks seriously in a literal, practical way. Avoid any outdoor activity that could spark a fire, including barbecues, in areas under heat or fire warnings, since the vast majority of these fires start from ordinary human activity, not lightning. If you're near an active fire zone, know your evacuation route before you're told to use it, not after. And on the health side, drink water steadily through the day rather than waiting until you're thirsty. Avoid direct sun between roughly noon and 6 p.m. Keep at least one room in your home genuinely cool, and check on elderly relatives or neighbors living alone, because heat-related health emergencies disproportionately hit older adults who may not recognize the danger themselves until it's serious. If you're anywhere in the storm and hail zone, the Western Balkans and neighboring Central European countries, the priority shifts to short-notice severe weather awareness. Keep an eye on your local hydrometeorological services warnings, because these storms are developing and moving with far less lead time than the heat wave did. If a warning mentions large hail, get vehicles under cover if you can do so safely and quickly. And treat any warning about power network damage as a real possibility, not a formality. Have a charged phone, a flashlight, and a basic plan for a multi-hour outage. And if you're planning travel to Europe in the coming weeks, regardless of which half of the split you're headed toward, build flexibility into your plans. Fire-affected regions may have air quality concerns, transport disruptions, or evacuation zones you'll want to avoid entirely. Storm-affected regions may have short-notice flight delays or road closures tied to flash flooding or hail damage. Neither side of this split is a reason to panic, but both sides are a good reason to check local conditions the week before you travel, not just months in advance when you booked the trip. So here's where this actually stands. As of today, July 24th, Europe's third heat wave of 2026 hasn't ended. It is split along a fault line running roughly through the middle of the continent, with the southwest locked in worsening drought, record or near-record wildfires, and firefighter deaths in Spain, France, and Italy, while the Western Balkans and parts of Central Europe have flipped almost overnight into severe thunderstorms and damaging hail as the same weather pattern destabilizes on its eastern edge. Spain has declared a state of emergency. France is seeking EU wildfire assistance, and 5 countries across the Balkans are bracing for storms that are still actively spreading as I record this. I'll be tracking both halves of this split over the coming days, whether the fire emergency in the southwest gets worse before it gets better, and whether the storm activity in the east keeps intensifying as it spreads. This is exactly the kind of story that looks like 2 separate headlines if you're not paying attention, and 1 connected weather emergency if you are. If breakdowns like this are useful to you, subscribe, because I'll have the update the moment either half of this pattern shifts. I'll see you in the next one.